It's time to be woke. Take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't, is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the fact.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Monday morning, everybody's favorite time of the week. And we are ready to do a big show for you. We've got a couple of in a series that are coming up this week that have a common theme. Before we get to that, I have a quick story that I want to talk about first. It has to do, of course, with COVID-19 and what's been happening in different parts of the world. And a lot of people that understand virology and how the pandemic actually functions, as opposed to the anti-vaxxer crew or the anti-mask crew or the capitalists. We're now seeing a new variant, which is called the Delta variant. And I believe that's variant 16172. And it's being shown to be significantly less affected by the vaccine. And of course, that was the scare that we were going to get to this point if we didn't take drastic measures throughout the globe to try to contain COVID-19, but instead the oligarch society and the elitist class decided that we weren't going to worry about other countries because it doesn't necessarily affect us. Of course, they were completely wrong about that. And what we're seeing in Canada is that over the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've been in lockdown, and that's been province-wide in the province of Ontario. And we just came out of that on Friday in what they're calling phase one, where we've now lifted a few of the restrictions in a way to get past what this lockdown where everybody is required to be in their home, except for having to essentially leave to go to like a doctor's appointment or to go grocery shopping or go to work. That came to an end on Friday. And our numbers were spiking in the third or fourth wave, or whichever wave it is now, or whatever wave they consider it to be. And those numbers have significantly dropped down. And, a lot of that has to do with the lockdown, but it also has to do with the warmer weather that's come around. And so people are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel and starting to think that this is finally coming to an end as we get vaccinated. And what happened? A mining facility in northern Canada, which had a couple of hundred workers. Now, don't quote my numbers on this. I'm not 100% sure. I just know the story. But apparently the Delta variant broke out in a super spreader event at this mining facility. And before anybody knew that they had it, the shift change of workers going out, workers coming back in, sent all of the workers that had it all across to the different corners of Canada. And this is, of course, now going to put us in jeopardy once again. So if you thought that this was all coming to an end soon, to quote Khan from the Star Trek movie, The Wrath of Khan, no, Kirk, the game's not over. So that's what we're going for. Anyways, on that happy note, we've got a big show for you today, and I will be pleased and happy to introduce my wonderful and talented co-host, Miss Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Andy, that was a terrifying story. As I'm sitting here, I'm shocked, and I shouldn't be, because we've been talking about it. And the fundamental rule for all life, where humans are concerned, is take care of each other. I mean, these are all basic things, and this is going to get into the core of what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, you and I have said it many, many times. I know other people have said it. If we're not going to look, it's all of us or none. That is not a catchy slogan. It is not a cute little t-shirt. That is historical fact. And like you said with the Delta, just it's terrifying, because here and people, come on now. So everyone's out here running around with their vaccines, 1 or 2 or whatever, thinking, oh, we're done. No, we're not done. We're not done. And
not even close.
No.
Well, apparently, as of tomorrow, because of a rule change, that the direct family members of healthcare professionals in the province of Ontario are now eligible to get their second shot. And so you have to wait 3 weeks from your first one, which tomorrow would have been 3 weeks ago for me. So there's a very good possibility that I'll be getting my second vaccine this week or early next week, which is good, except that the initial findings, and I don't think this is, been studied enough, but what they're talking about with this Delta variant is if you've had both shots of your vaccine, the Pfizer or the Moderna or the AstraZeneca or whichever one you got, that the efficacy of it with this Delta is 30%, right?
Wow.
As opposed to 95% when it first came out. So
that is that's crazy. So Holly joins us this morning. Good morning, Holly. And she appreciated your con reference, as did I, as a Trekkie. And she says profits over people. So Oz also joins in. He says, Carrie, how's your vaccine recidivism rate in your area? Well, Oz, I got to tell you, in New Mexico, we were leading the pack in all 50 states. But even our best now, I think Maine is ahead of us at 60%. We're at 52% of the entire population. So even the best states only have about half the population that have been vaccinated at all. Not 1 or 2, but just 1. So even in the United States, we're doing a horrific job. And then again, the profits over people, as Holly mentioned in the chat, it's just that's what we're going with, right? So people will die in other countries, and that the Delta variant will come back to the United States. So it is a massive plague that is still ongoing. And while people are crying about, I don't mean to belittle it, because it is trauma, but when people are upset about, I want to get back to normal, no, there is no normal now. This is the new normal, and we need to get used to it, because if we don't, again, the Delta is going to turn into the Gamma and all of these other things that are just going to be, all our efforts will be wasted. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, it's a very scary thing. And part of what we're seeing now in Ontario with the with this phase 1 is they're talking now that the Canadian and American governments are getting together to negotiate a reopening of the border, right? So let's just flush everything we just did down the toilet and start again.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like New Zealand, who was the best of the best by closing down. They're starting to have some issues there. Australia is having another issue. So it's just everything that we went through, people still are not getting it. And I don't know what it is about the human population where we have to personally experience pain and loss to really understand it. And I guess not enough of us have died or suffered hospitalization, and in this country, medical bills that come from it. We're just not getting it. And I still go back to the police officer in Boston over a year ago who was he was a denier And then he lost his father and his brother, and then he became an outspoken advocate. Why do we have to get to that level? That just, it boggles the mind. So
Yeah, you see that a lot, right? I'm for it until it affects me, and then I'm against it, right? It's almost human nature. And if you look at the species of the planet, right, the one thing that is consistent through all species, including human beings, should be perpetuation of your species, right? You would think that that would be the case, but for some reason, it's missing in a lot of human beings. And the problem is they're the ones that are currently running things.
well, that's true. And for those of you who are not religious or not spiritual, bear with me for a second. But one of the things in my path, my chosen path, we learn very early, and you're supposed to adopt it, is the root of all error comes from I, me, and mine. Right. So it's not the perpetuation of this species that we're concerned with. We're my personal happiness and fulfillment. And that is where we go astray. And I think all of this from a morality standpoint, wherever your code of morality comes from, that's the basis of it. It should be us, again, all of us or none. And this kind of gets into the topic that we chose for today. And I want to do this gently because let me back up a little bit. In another life, many, many years ago, I had to go through certification training for leadership development. I had to go through this entire course because at the time, corporations were suffering massive losses from attrition rates. And we still see this today when you are cutting benefits and cutting pensions and all of these things. You have a high attrition rate. And at that time, it was a massive company who was getting ready to get rid of their pensions. So what they were doing was taking people like me through a certification course to teach leadership development to managers, because they wanted to offset, on the one hand, this nefarious reason. On the other, they wanted to develop their management, because they recognized at the time that just because somebody's a good employee and you promote them doesn't mean they necessarily make good leaders, whether it's a small team or a big division or a senior vice president. So those skills are taught. And I go back to the marketing push where they said, I forget what the commercial was, leaders are not made, they're born, or something like that. I forget what it. And that is such bullshit. It is absolute bullshit. It was a marketing gimmick, and people kind of bought into it, right? So we saw this under Reagan. We saw this under Clinton. Look at every president. They talk about the leadership, that they're born leaders. Bullshit. None of that is true. You have to learn how to be a leader the same way you learn how to sew on a button, same way you learn how to change a tire. These are all fundamental things that people need to have, whether you do go into a leadership role or you don't. And I would say leadership is quantified by parenthood, or if you have fur babies instead of children. All of these things, the skills that you learn in leadership development training, translate to just about every area of your life, except that we have stopped developing leaders. We just assume that you know what to do, or worst case scenario, you're going to learn from bad examples like the series Mad Men. All of that was the worst case scenario in leadership development. Absolutely the worst case. But we see people over and over going towards that model, what they see, emulating these bad behaviors, going into the dictatorial, authoritarian leader, my way or the highway. Sometimes it's a personality issue, and sometimes it's a learned behavior. Because I'm the boss, you will listen to me. Doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And so there are several management styles that are available to you, and one of them is the authoritarian, my way or the highway. Another is what we call the democratic leadership development. And that is, we're going to kind of get you a little bit of buy-in, but at the end of the day, I'm going to make the decision as a leader. And then the last one is kind of I'm going to describe it in a derogatory way, that drum circle where all opinions are valid and equal. And we're going to try and move forward in this jumbled kind of hegemony type of thing. And in my opinion, that is the worst case scenario for moving forward. I've seen it in organizations. It just doesn't work. And part of that is because while you may have a good idea, you don't necessarily have the experience to know that that idea fails for many valid reasons. And that's okay, but you need to be able to pull back and listen to somebody who has that experience, right? So the reason for doing this particular series is because we're seeing across the board, and we've seen this since 2015, we have some very well-meaning, very enthusiastic, progressive organizations, progressive groups, progressive movements that just don't seem to be making any headway. And you got to wonder why. And we've talked quite often about the co-opting effort, where you either put somebody in place who is completely inept on purpose, or you put somebody in place who is there being paid by another organization to stall it. So those things are a factor. And we've dealt with that at length. But now I want to take a look at leadership, because there are some stories that we're going to deal with later on in the week. And Andy and I don't do, we don't do a scorched earth. We try to always make it a teaching moment when there's a massive issue. And this is why I wanted to set up the groundwork for this week with a leadership review. Now, the course that I used to teach was anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks long. So obviously I can't do it justice in the short amount of time we have, but I want to pose it as an introduction. If you've never seen this before, or if you're not familiar with it, in my opinion, this is what's missing in progressive movements, in progressives themselves, in progressive organizations. It is the servant leader model. And I think that it is uniquely suited to progressivism because of what it teaches and what it demands of a leader. And I will say that not only have I taught this course to managers, but the evidence is very clear. And then I got to use it in a situation where I was at a massive insurance company and had 3 weeks to build a high-performing team, and then to take that team in 10 months and retool the entire company in 10 months to prepare for ACA. And not only did we do it, but we made such waves across all 5 states that the entire department was lauded significantly. Some of the projects that we came out with, some of the efforts that we were able to achieve just with a small team, and nobody had to work overtime to do it. So I know this works. I know it's proven, and I want to introduce it here today. So Andy, let's start with the first graphic here.
Okay.
So, Holly Peter principle, yes, you're right in a sense, and some of this is intuitive, some of it you've seen it before, but the entire servant leadership program goes back to reminders of it. So it not only introduces to you what a leader actually looks like, but how to implement that and refine yourself. So it's not only a course of introduction, but then there are lessons in it for yourself. You have homework. You actually have homework, and you're redefining yourself. So it goes back to the principle of every day you get up and you make a choice, and you can redefine who you are. So for those of you who have noticed, my lighting is horrific today. And the reason for that is I am personally going through, I don't want to call it a rebranding, but it's this massive shift in what I thought, what I knew, and what I'm doing. So I am sitting right now in the middle of the desert. Water and electricity are an issue. Internet is a massive issue, but I'm doing this because there's a bigger project at work here. And in order to get to where I am right now, which is incredibly humbling, I have this goal in mind that not only will benefit me personally, but is part of a bigger effort. We're doing a proof of concept here. But to get to this point, I had to get rid of 99% of everything I owned. I have never camped before in my life. And I am now living in the middle of the desert with a water tank and a generator. And it's terrifying. But this is part of the transformational thing that I have to go through in order to get to this larger goal. And the entire program with servant leadership is the same. It is the same. And it begins with the principle that you as a leader are last. You are the servant for everyone that reports up to you and below that. So your core job as a leader is to remove barriers. Number one, remove barriers from the people who are actually doing the work. So when you think of every CEO, and I tell you this, and I mean it, and I have seen this time and time again, every CEO at every major company could be replaced with a 9-year-old today. Absolutely. And the company would still function. And you probably have a better time of it. That is because they don't actually do the work. They are the chief spokesperson and salesperson, but that's it. That's all they do in a public setting, or at least that's all they should do. So with the leadership development, what you do as a leader is you retool the ego, you quiet that ego, you get rid of it, and you become humble. That it is not a privilege that people work for you or your company. It is a privilege that they work with you. Right? So it flips this thing completely. So your first job is to remove barriers. If you have workers, volunteers, and they cannot move forward with objectives or goals, or they don't even have objectives or goals, it is your job to help develop them. So if you have an organization that doesn't have bylaws, or it doesn't have a mission statement, or it doesn't have any of these code of conduct things, your first job is to organize a team to get that done. And we see this time and time again in progressive organizations where it's not happening. These are like groundwork, fundamental things. You've got to have a mission. How do you achieve this mission? You've got to have bylaws. You've got to have a code of conduct. So when Andy and I went independent, one of the first things we did was an operating agreement, right? And I think, Andy, you kind of have these skills naturally, which is why I think we get along. Because you're always about taking the high road and having in writing what we will do, what we will say, how we will behave. And then you're very good at reminding me that, because I'm I'm a little more cutthroat. But Andy's right there to say, no, we're going to take the high road and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And if that doesn't work, then we'll back up and try a new tact. So this is part of where that humility comes in. Then the other part of it is not just that you remove barriers. This one is most important. It is your job to protect your people from the suits, is what it's called. Suits meaning the board of directors, outside influence, any of those people who are very important in a perceptive model who may come after your people. Right. So if you're a middle manager, or you're a lower manager, and your boss comes after one of your people, it is your job to defend them amicably. So that is part of taking the high road. If one of your employees has done something, or one of your volunteers has done something, it is your job to say, okay, what is the problem? Let's identify it. Is this objectively wrong? Did we have things in place where this person knew it was objectively wrong? If they did, what is the discipline process in place right now to make sure that they understand it? If all of that is not there, then that is you as a manager that is fully accountable. And this again goes through from big corporations down to small organizing efforts. This is what it means to be a leader. And we'll go through why this benefits you as an organization, because it does exponentially. I mean, corporations across the board have been using this for years quietly, uh, because it goes against the neoliberal mindset. So you probably haven't heard so much about it, except in one example we'll get to.
And
And this
Carrie,
is,
if you don't mind,
yeah,
I'd like to just chime in with a specific example of my work experience. As some of our viewers might know, I was an electrician for 30 years at the General Motors plant in Ontario, in Southern Ontario. So it was from age 21 to age 51. So 30 straight years. And all that time, my direct supervisor was probably recycled through, I would say, an average of about once every 4 to 6 months. So I would get a new supervisor because of the size of the plant and how many people are being shuffled around. And so you think of 30 years, so every 4 to 6 months, so that's at least 60 supervisors. The supervisor or the manager that you're describing there, I can only think of 3 that I would describe in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if you're an executive in an organization, board of directors or something, and you're not familiar with this, how would you know? How would you know that this is one of the biggest, most effective tools that you have to train everyone else so that you meet your numbers every time? Absolutely. And going back to the example that I lived, I had a very small team, but we were so high performing because we implemented these leadership principles. So not only was I accountable for everything, absolutely accountable, not the people who reported to me. I was accountable. I was able to give them the leadership development program so that they themselves could do it. And to this day, I am so privileged that any one of those people on that team today, they're like, anywhere you work, I want to come work for you. Absolutely. Because it's not only creates harmony, but getting back to the basics of a livable wage and everything else, this whole nonsense that people don't want to work. No, we fundamentally want to work, but we want to do something with meaning. We want to do something that has objectives and goals that we can meet and challenges us. We want to be challenged. And if you doubt that at all, look at the productivity numbers, right? So look at the people who work at Amazon. We are not decrying the work that Amazon does. What we are decrying is the way that the people are treated. They're not treated like human beings. They're not given respect. They're not given ownership. And if that happened, you think Amazon is making a profit right now? They would be off the charts, absolutely off the charts. So couple comments that came in. Jim Bird, Jim says, transforming since Sanders campaign 2015. And Jim, I get that you may personally be doing that, but I do want to push back because the Sanders campaign was very good at pointing out issues and they provided policy, but they did not train leadership development within their own campaign. And how do we know that? Because afterwards we saw several complaints that came about and things like that. Now, you're always going to have complaints in an organization. It happens. It's the nature of a diverse workforce. But what came out of the Sanders campaign, particularly in 2016, was that the leaders were not listening to the critiques, strengths, and weaknesses that were being forwarded to them across their divisions. So particularly one example was in the South. There weren't enough Sanders volunteers at the state level listening to local on the ground volunteers about visiting traditional Black colleges and universities. And that cost them big time. So that was an example of leadership at the middle and upper tiers, not listening to the experts on the ground, their own volunteers. And this is part of the leadership development model. You go through 12 different categories of correcting your own behavior, not the people who work for you, but your behavior, and being accountable for making sure that happens repeatedly over and over again that you're doing self-assessments. So Jim, good example there, but I'm going to push back on that. And then he also says any organization that doesn't put in strong rules, bylaws to prevent being usurped by the dark side, i.e. the DNC corps, whatever. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the co-opting that we're talking about. And then Oz chimed in. He said, I had college grads who were promoted over far more capable leaders in my job. And that's something that we saw quite a lot, particularly in the business community. And I remember writing articles, never hire an MBA. And the articles were all about MBA without experience, because you can train leadership. And even in colleges and universities, they are not teaching this servant leadership model. So Andy, the next graphic, the one with the triangles on it, I think this gives a pretty good example of what we are taught by, corporate media, marketing gurus, all of this sort of thing, as opposed to what servant leadership is. So Robert Greenleaf obviously was the one who organized the content, but it's not brand new. I do prefer the core studies because it's the one that I went through for certification, but I like that there are workbooks and models to help reinforce this, because it takes a while to get into this mindset, because as we started the program, we're all about I, me, and my in all things. And yet in the servant leadership model, you have to take yourself and be last. So here is a really good example of, the pyramid model that we were taught. And then, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I have cats playing behind me. So I don't know if you can hear it, but they're really loud. So in the
Carrie, you need to be their boss.
Cats don't listen to anybody. They just don't. They just don't. But so in this example, I think it makes it pretty clear, and I'll post these a little bit later so that you can get a really good idea of what servant leadership is. But the people at the bottom, the very bottom, think about the people who are your frontline first service personnel. They become the top of the pyramid. So if you're running a campaign, you're running for office, or you're doing something like Medicare for All, the people who are out there on the street or wherever talking to people one-on-one, number one, they're getting a good aggregate of the objections, common objections, and they need to have a way to forward that up to the top to make sure that you answer those objections effectively. So you're handing out tools to everyone saying, okay, here's our FAQ. If you get this one, here's your answer. If you get this one, here's your answer. All of those things. And then the other part of it is they're probably one of the few touches that end person is going to get. So if that's a voter, if that's someone you're trying to convince to support to your side, you want to make sure that person on the ground feels encouraged, has a level of autonomy, and has ownership, is a consummate stakeholder in everything that's going on, because they're going to be the one that leaves the impression with the person that you need, whether it's a voter or whether it's somebody that you need to come out and support your organization. So these are really, really key factors that I think people are missing in this, as well as, being able to write things down. But one of the key examples that you just cannot get around as a manager, as a leader, as a CEO, your moral compass must be absolute. Absolute. So if you write your bylaws, you write your code of conduct, and you yourself do not follow it, then you might as well just scrap the organization and leave, or just get rid of everybody and go. And it's so tempting, right? So if you've ever been a manager and you've been able to travel, or you work for a campaign, national campaign, and they send you to another state or whatever, and you are so tempted to take that nicer hotel room, or to eat out at a restaurant that is maybe above per diem, shame on you as a leader. You are last. You are absolutely last. And if you are not following that moral guideline, And then one of the examples that we'll get to later in the week is if we see this, and Andy, you and I have experienced this in other organizations. If you post on social media, or you like a post on social media, or you benefit in some way by publishing a story, and then turn around and do something opposite with one of the people in your organization, if you punish them, if you admonish them, or you do as I say, not as I do, and you are a leader, you have now defrauded your entire organization and your mission by doing so. And I cannot stress that enough, right? So the buck stops here is a prime example. If you are not going to lead by example, you will not get that trust. You will not get that buy-in. And it needs to be you at all times, not only leading from that strong moral ground, but you need to also be accountable for all the rules too. And so on Friday, I want to do an entire segment on the PR aspect of servant leadership, because there's a very simple formula that I think avoids a lot of issues, but it revolves around accountability. And that's the one skill set across the board that most adults do not have. We will revert to issues like children making excuses, deflecting, all of these sort of things, rather than leaning into and embracing accountability, which is so critical. But I'll save that for Friday. So is this, Andy, is this making sense? I mean, I almost think that it's going to be harder for you because you live it daily, right? So I don't know.
I just keep thinking in terms of what I know and what I've always agreed with in terms of management levels. And of course, like I said, I only worked in one place my entire career, so I only have that to draw from. But so far, I completely agree with everything you've said. Absolutely. And the industry that we're in, and it's not just the automotive industry, it's large corporations, everywhere, all over the place, in terms of management and how the the powers that be choose who they bring in to be these managers, right, is completely opposite to what we're talking about here, right? It got to a point where I worked that the managers that they decided to hire to bring into the organization when they needed to hire some were kids, that were just out of college or university, that were basically a completely blank slate, right? And then they would go through management training, but they were told things like, the workers are trying to screw you, don't let them, and never trust them, right? That was the entire mindset. And the industry overall, right? I remember seeing articles in the newspapers saying, that to attract investment, corporations were getting their managers to treat their employees poorly because that attracted more investments if they knew that the upper echelon of the company were maximizing profits and minimizing, the safety of the workers and the treatment of the workers. And those were the ones that made more money. Right.
And it's always short-term gains. And so what I'm talking about is sustainability and growth, right? So we went from the quality model down to the quarterly model, tied it to executive compensation. And in particular, my favorite little scheme that they do is you have different, at the end of the year, depending on how the company did, you might get a dividend or a bonus, but the executive level calculation was always a little bit different than the regular folks. And that is the opposite of what should be done, because that is short-term gains. And in those companies, you see them struggling for profitability. You see them struggling for growth potential and market competition. So they have to go through nefarious things in order to maintain existence. Whereas companies that have adopted the servant leadership model, organizations that have adopted it, are growing exponentially. One of the prime examples that I studied, and it might be a little bit little aged for people, but Southwest Airlines. So Southwest Airlines at one time was headed the way of Piedmont Air. And I can hear everybody going, who? Piedmont Air? Exactly. Piedmont used to be a very thriving, competitive airline. They're gone. And Southwest was going through the same thing. And this was under the Reagan years, early 80s, early 90s. And the leader of that organization, and what the hell was his name? Hugh? Oh, I should know it because I did a thesis on it and I'm drawing a blank. But he went to his employees and he said, look, I cut my salary in half. And I want to be frank with all of you. If we don't make some changes. Now, this is not at a time when CEOs were making 300% more. I think he was making 20 to 30% more than the lowest employee in his organization. But he went back to them and he said, Herb Albert was his name. He went back to them and in a company-wide organization, he said, look, if we don't make some serious changes, we are going to fold. And I don't want that to happen. So here's what I'm proposing. I want you to come back in 1 month with 3 ideas to help save our organization. I'm not going to tell you what those ideas should be. I'm not going to guide you in any way, shape, or form, but I want you to come back with your top 3. And they did. And one of the things that the employees did was they voluntarily took a pay cut, all of them across the board, same pay cut. The other thing they did was, we want to be able to tell you where things are going wrong, where things are inefficient, where we could do better. And that was the second thing. The third thing was, we want to have autonomy for customer service, because right now, if somebody is sitting in a waiting area and they're complaining, there's nothing I can do. I can't do anything. Give me some power to make that customer happy. And so they started to implement all of these things. And the next thing you know, not only was the organization stable, but they were listed on the NASDAQ, and they chose the moniker of LUV, as in love. And you still see that today. If you go out on the NASDAQ and you look up Southwest Air, that's why they're called LUV, because they went to a love model. We are going to take care of each other. We're going to take care of our customers. We're going to take care of our business so that we are here for generations to come. And that is why they went with the love model. But Andy, this last example, the Davis gentleman, this is one that is more recent. And we've seen this come about on social media. And a few years ago, 6 years ago, this was the credit card company, servicing company, where the CEO decided, just as a business case, our minimum wage here at this company is going to be $70,000 with benefits. And you remember, you see this now, the pushback on Fox and all of the conservative media, even a little bit on CNN, was there's no way this company is going to survive. They called it socialism, and it has nothing to do with socialism. This is part of the servant leader model. Not only are you the servant to your employees, but part of you protecting them from the suits is taking care of your people. Absolutely taking care of them, whether that is financial, whether that is defending them, whether that is removing barriers. This kind of encompasses all of the subjects of servant leadership. Take care of your people. Make them feel like people. Make them feel like partners. And that's what he did in one small example. This company did many different things, but the biggest example that we saw that was so shocking was the salary raise. So now here we are 6 years later, and they are a case study for Harvard. They're a case study for all of these different businesses, and they're going through the roof with their profitability. So they have an attrition rate that is so low because nobody wants to leave this organization. So you're saving money, you're saving efficiency, You have some committed diehard stakeholders in your company. You have a CEO who is still making his profits. Everybody's having a better time of it, and they have accountability and stakeholder model across the board. Are we getting this? So from a progressive model, not only do you have to defend against co-opting, but if you become a servant leader in whatever role you have, whether it's the frontline person, whether it's being a coordinator for several people, whether it's an executive, if you adopt the servant leader model in yourself, you will identify the co-opt effort so much faster, because you create a culture of I take care of everyone, they take care of everyone, and you'll spot that person who's all about the I, me, and my quickly. And you'll be able to get them out of the organization. And then also, most of us in progressive organizations, we're volunteers, right? We could be doing absolutely anything else with our time. I could be worried about my household and what I'm doing and just not care about any of this. But we are out here for a reason. And it's a reason that is bigger than us, bigger than who we are, bigger than what surrounds me. We want to make a difference for ourselves, our family, our community, and the rest of the world. So if you as a leader are not leaning into a servant leader model, you are doing a massive disservice, not only to yourself and your organization, but the people who are there, who are giving of their time and effort. So it's one of those things that I see across the board on all of these organizations, not just with candidates and campaigns, but even, in the push for Medicare for all. We've been at this for so long and making little headway because we have examples of one organization won't support this effort because my name's not on it. Our organization's not on the logo, so therefore I won't do it, or we're not leading it, forgetting the ultimate goal. So just a real quick shout out. We have the Medicare for All marches coming up next month all across the country. And poor Savage Joy, she put out this tweet, and I could feel the frustration. She's like, why are people not doing this? If your organization's not sponsoring it, shouldn't you be pushing it anyway? And I agree with her wholeheartedly. Medicare for All affects all of us. And for those who are not in the US, it affects you too, because we are the influencers for the rest of the world. And if we're not taking care of each other, if we are still with the neoliberal austerity model, if we are still okay with death and misery, we're going to pass that on to the rest of the world, right? That is our chief export.
Yeah. So, and we've talked about this so many times, Carrie, about why the left isn't better at promoting itself and why we can't seem to get any traction when it seemingly looks like there's more of us than anybody else in society, right? Why can't we do that? And I think a lot of it, of course, is what you were talking about. And people make excuses that, the center, the centrist DNC, the Democratic Party is so much more organized, and the Republicans are so much more organized. They're so easier to keep in line, and a lot of people always say that, well, they're so much better funded and they have so much better structure. Well, if we have the numbers, you and I have demonstrated on a basically no budget at all to have a relatively successful little show between the two of us, right? And that's organizing. That's not has anything to do with money. It has basically just doing things right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And with your examples, when we talk about the RNC and the DNC, they're Piedmont Air. They're dying. They know it. This is why they are coalescing and working together on so many different things. Think about it. When Hillary was complaining that the DNC was disorganized, had no tools, and was near bankruptcy, she was right. And we see that from a political spectrum. So if you have dying Piedmont Air why wouldn't we as progressives turn around and be Southwest Air and adopt the love model? So this means me as a person, and I go back to this. This is something that I try to remind myself and live by. There was this essay contest back in the early 1900s. What's wrong with the world today? What's wrong? And one of the authors who submitted to it won. And he won with the shortest essay ever. His response to what's wrong with the world today was 2 words: I am. And he won. And that is still true today. What is wrong with the world today? I am what's wrong with the world today. What can I do to be better? What can I do to be better to the people around me? What can I do to run an organization better? What can I do to reach out to people the way that I want to be reached out to? And that is what the progressive movement is supposed to be about. But I think a lot of us forgot about it, where we put ourselves in situations where I need this income, so therefore I'm going to do things that maybe are a little sketchy. Or if I'm a candidate in a campaign, I am going to make promises and pledges that I'm not going to follow up because this person over here has promised me a whole bunch of money not to do that. So today was setting
I
up the.
agree with that completely. I'm sorry for interrupting, Carrie,
No,
but
please.
no, it's one of the phrases that or catchphrases that came out of the Bernie 2020 run was, "Are you willing to fight for someone you don't know?" Right, and I think that that was a very revealing thing. That if you can ask yourself that and the answer is no, then you have it, then you can't really call yourself a progressive, right? I think that you have to come to a better understanding in society that we all grow together or we don't grow at all, right? We've made that point several times. And I've talked to so many different Americans through these media or platforms and what have you, that are only concerned with their own well-being and don't give a crap about anybody else, right? And I think that that is, by and large, a large portion of why the United States is where it is, right? And I'm not saying that people are generally say think that, but the American propaganda, the greed and the mean scenario that look out for number one and take care of your own and screw everybody else, right? The more people that we can come to an understanding that if we advocate for policies that help everyone, you're included in that. It helps you as well. And people don't make that connection.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So with that said, I wanted to set up this particular discussion, and I'm going to lean into accountability because on Wednesday we're going to have a very special guest back, and this is me in particular. I'm not going to speak for Andy, but this is me in particular living up to the accountability, because I have been holding on to this information for a couple weeks, and I want to be accountable for making a conscious decision to hold this story, which to me an omission is still a lie. And I have been uncomfortable with it, but I was asked to hold this story so that others could make an effort to build bridges. And I've held it as long as I possibly could, but I feel like whatever effort was attempted has now gone. And this is an effort at accountability to do the right thing and do my job as a journalist, because there are some situations that have developed across a couple different progressive spaces where good people are being hurt, through this lack of accountability and lack of leadership in other areas. So I'm going to bring that story with you, and Andy, I'm going to rely on you to keep us on the high road, but we need to tell it. And it's something that has bothered me for a couple weeks now, particularly our participation in this story. So this is kind of like clearing the air for us, for me making decisions that I was uncomfortable with, to participate in activities that may not have been purely on the level when it comes to ethics and morality. So yeah, this is part of servant leadership, being accountable and being able to stand up for decisions you made that may not have been the right ones. So that'll be Wednesday. That's all I got for today, Andy.
Well, that's good, because that's all I got for today too, pretty much.
And hopefully when I come back on Wednesday, I'll have all of this fixed and a little better internets. So back to business as usual. So pardon the dust. So.
Oh no, it's you're fine, Carrie. Your audio is nice and strong. You know, you're a little ghostly, but that's okay. It's good for the fear factor, right?
Yeah. I'm always ghostly. Although I am now taupe. I have numerous suntans for me. So yeah, we get a couple people with some technical issues. So thank you for letting us know. We'll work on that. So this Leslie, Jerry, Jim, yeah, Leslie says it's all about the money, unfortunately. Yeah, Leslie, you may be right, but I think there's another piece of it that's in there, and we're going to talk about that on Wednesday. So I hope you join us for that. Jerry McCauley says, hey guys, good morning, Jerry. How are you? And then thank you to Jim and Oz for weighing in with their examples today. You guys really help round out the conversation and make it.
Internet just go down.
So unfortunately, that didn't happen. So we'll be back on Wednesday, and I'm purposely being a little obscure on this one. So more information is coming. Join us back here on Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. We will be live, fully interactive, and hopefully get some of these tech issues out of the way. So thank you so much for tuning in. Andy, take us out.
Well, I would be happy to. And thank you, Carrie. And once again, another great show. Everyone out there, thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we will see you bright and early on Wednesday morning. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone. We out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hammer the dog. We keeping it G.